The city of Prague was enshrouded in darkness and silence. The gates were locked, and the docks stood deserted. No one dared to move that night. Even thieves and mercenaries stayed off the streets and alleys. Silence draped over the rooftops like a shroud, and mothers hushed their children. Brave men dared to peek out their windows and gaze at the sky. Friends couldn't see their neighbors' houses from their front doors. So great was the caution. None of the city's residents dared to break the fragile silence that engulfed everything. The clouds hung heavy and low overhead. In a small wooden shack on the outskirts of the city walls, a mother laid her child in his cot, hushing him. "Why is it so quiet?" the child whispered. The mother pulled the blankets over him. "He comes tonight," the mother replied cryptically, ending the conversation with the look on her face. In a mansion overlooking the city square, a group of mercenaries gathered in a basement to quietly gamble. They rolled dice on a small piece of silk they had obtained. "The boss wants us to stay up all night, damn," one man said, cursing his poor luck. The man next to him picked up the dice. "He pays us well, though I still don't understand what's going on out there," he said, rolling the dice again. The captain stepped away from the basement door. "Old wives' tales rule this city, and that means easy money is all you need to understand," she said to her men. They went back to their gambling. "All I don't get is if it's an old wives' tale, wouldn't somebody in the city not follow the ritual?" the first man asked. "Yeah, if it's nothing, why don't you go outside?" the second man added. The captain shook her head. "I don't have answers, only orders. Stay inside, stay awake, and stay quiet until the sun rises." The clouds overhead began to take on an unnatural pallor. The wind picked up and swept them aside. The moon appeared closer to the ground, stained the color of blood. In the wealthy district, a merchant stood mesmerized, staring out of a clear-story window on his ground floor. "Step away, dear," his wife hissed. She was rather superstitious, having grown up in the city proper. "I just wanted to see the moon. I've never seen it like that." He heeded his wife's words and hurried over to the cushions she was lounging on. "It's not what you'll see. It's what you'll hear," she warned. He leaned into her. "How many of these have you slept through?" he teased. She glared at him, her hidden terror surfacing. "None," she whispered. He kissed her forehead. "Well, this will be the first one you spin with me, so at least try," he pleaded. She shook her head, tears welling up. You'll see." The light outside the window began to change, catching their attention. The silence was suddenly broken by heavy footsteps crunching on gravel. The sound shattered the night, piercing the minds of the merchant and his wife. A red lantern floated past the window. "What is that?" the merchant whispered faintly. The woman reached out and covered his mouth. His breath caught in his throat. He gazed at her, and tears streamed down her cheeks as she shook her head, eyes tightly shut. "I come from the ocean, to test your devotion," said a deep, grating voice outside, as if trying to emulate a nursery rhyme. The merchant covered his ears, hoping never to hear that voice again. The footsteps resumed, like drumbeats for an unseen army, stopping outside their back door. A sound like a turning stone will crash through the door. Terror gripped the merchant, and he shook his wife. "I didn't bolt the door," he whispered, pointing. They both stared at the solid wooden frame and small metal latch. The light faded slowly, in rhythm with whatever stood behind the door. "When I ask what's left, there's nothing but death." The grating voice boomed again. Bloody light shot through the window, illuminating the room as if the sun had turned dark red. The merchant's wife tried to suppress screams of sheer terror. The merchant approached the door, fear gripping him as never before. The latch creaked upward, grinding against its frame. The merchant tried to silently quicken his pace. His steps seemed like howls of warning to the mysterious intruder. When the latch reached its halfway point, the merchant reached the door. He tried to bolt the door slowly and silently. He slid it halfway along its railing when a soft pressure fell upon the door. The merchant leaned back against it, desperately hoping his presence went unnoticed. The pressure subsided, and the light in the room returned to normal. The merchant and his wife sighed in relief. The bolt clicked into place. Screeching began outside, so loud it drowned out all thought. The merchant screamed in terror as the door disintegrated inward. In the basement, an unholy cacophony roused the company. The captain demanded they lower their voices even more. They huddled closer together, uncertain of their bravado. "What is it? What's happening?" one of the men asked the captain. They all looked to her like lost dogs. Unnerved, she sighed. "I don't know. I just know people are dying," she replied tersely, avoiding the conversation. Her expression must have given her away. "Come on, this ain't no normal job. If something's coming after us, I'd rather face it on the streets than cramped down here," one of the company stated. Men nodded and whispered their agreement. The captain leaned back. "I do know that whatever is happening, there is no fighting it. If it were brigands pillaging and raping, people wouldn't be screaming like that." She pointed towards the sound. "Those are people who wish to die because they're terrified." As if by magic, the sound died down when the captain pointed. Some of the men began to understand, fear running down their spines. "What is this old wives' tale then? The one that causes this mass lockdown?" One of the men remembered. The captain sighed, knowing she could no longer avoid it. "They say it says, 'I come from the ocean, to test the people's devotion. There's nothing left but death. It walks the streets, listening for lies,' is how they put it. Hell if I know what that means." The cell's words were almost petrified by the outlandish children's story. Either way, it kills people, but not before torturing them brutally. Maybe it's just a serial killer that comes out once a year. Maybe that's why we're here. "What about all the king's soldiers?" a bright-minded Salesword inquired. "Surely, if it were a killer, soldiers would be patrolling the streets, the lights would be on, and the people would sleep soundly?" The group broke into a heated whispering debate over the validity of the serial killer theory. They carried on for many minutes before their bickering was silenced by 3 booming knocks on the cellar door. The company got to their feet and drew their swords and daggers. The captain cautiously approached the opposite stairwell, leading up to the cellar door and the alley beyond. The knocks rang out again, harshly against the thick metal. "What do you think?" "Silence, all of you," the captain ordered. She crept up the stairs and gazed through the crack of the large metal doors into the bloody light beyond. Blood-red light seeped through. She gasped, then collapsed down the stairs. Her armor and swords clanked loudly as she tumbled down the short stairwell. 2 of her men tried to catch her but failed as she hit her head on the stone floor, rendering her unconscious. The company stepped away from the cellar door, their steps tentative. "What do we do?" the youth inquired, terror dripping from every word. "Stay quiet," said the bravest of them. He ascended the stairs even slower and quieter than before, peering through the opening. He descended to the floor, sheathing his weapon. Whatever it was, it must have moved on. "The captain will tell us, I'm sure," he said, leaning down to pick her up. "Let's make her more." His windpipe was in the captain's hand, blood pouring down his neck and breastplate. As he fell, she rose, eyes shut. A shocked cry rang out, and the men drew their weapons, ready to strike her down if she moved against them. Standing, the captain smiled. "When I ask what's left, there's nothing but death," she breathed, and opened her eyes, bathing the room in the color of blood. The shack's walls shook with the thunder of terror as it swept through the city's poorest district. The boy couldn't help but begin to cry in fear. His mother rushed in, covering his mouth and trying to awkwardly hug him close. "Hush now. Mustn't be afraid. Must be quiet," she cooed, rocking him back and forth. He quieted, but continued to shudder. As he became quiet, so did the nearest cries and shouts. The woman pulled her child's head into her shoulder and covered his ears, softly humming. Nearby, footsteps began, and the crunching of stone beneath heavy boots carried a great distance. The city was so silent that when they came closer, it was like drums beating towards her door. Tears formed in her eyes, and silent prayers fell from her lips as she rocked the boy frantically. She heard the latch turn, but the bolt held. 3 resounding knocks in the night. She sealed her eyes and forced her tears down. 3 more knocks. In a nearby home, a sound like glass shattering broke out. The footsteps resumed, carrying farther and farther away until they faded to nothingness. She breathed a sigh of relief and put her child back on the bed, drawing up the blankets again. "Put your head under your pillow if you need to cry again," she whispered, kissing him on the head. She rose to leave and knocked her shoulder into something. Slowly, she turned and froze, petrified by fear and terrified of breaking the silence. He was standing there in full glory in front of her. His cloak was shadow. His face was death.
Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to listen to similar stories in future.